She was the sweetest face in Hollywood, the girl who could do no wrong, America's golden child who brought joy to millions. But behind those innocent eyes and that perfect smile, Hayley Mills was harboring a secret that would shock the world when she finally broke her silence. The person she truly hated more than anyone wasn't some vindictive rival or jealous competitor. It was someone much closer, someone who shaped her entire career, someone whose control over her life would leave scars that lasted decades. This is the untold story of how Hollywood's most beloved child star became trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, and the devastating price she paid for that fame. Picture this. It's 1960, and a 12-year-old girl with luminous eyes and an unaffected charm steps off a plane in Los Angeles. She doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become one of the most famous faces on the planet. Her name is Hayley Mills, and Walt Disney himself has just called her the greatest movie find in 25 years. Within months, she'll win a special Academy Award for her performance in Pollyanna. Within a year, she'll star in The Parent Trap, playing both twins in a technical marvel that captivated audiences worldwide. The world is at her feet, and everyone believes she's living the ultimate fairy tale. But fairy tales, as we all know, often hide the darkest truths. Hayley Mills was born into British theatrical royalty. Her father, John Mills, was one of England's most distinguished actors, and her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, was a celebrated playwright. Growing up in this world meant that acting wasn't just a career option, it was practically encoded in her DNA. But nobody could have predicted the meteoric rise that awaited young Hayley. At just 12 years old, she landed a role in the British film Tiger Bay, acting opposite her father. The critics didn't just notice her performance, they were stunned by it. Here was a child who didn't just recite lines, she embodied characters with a naturalness that seasoned actors spent decades trying to achieve. Cinema managers who watched the preview literally stood up and shouted the word magnificent. And that single word would change everything. Word of this extraordinary young talent reached across the Atlantic to the ears of Walt Disney, a man who had built an empire on understanding what audiences wanted. Disney was meticulous, almost obsessive, about the stars he brought into his studio. When his team suggested Hayley Mills for a role in his upcoming film Pollyanna, he was initially hesitant. Child actors were notoriously unpredictable, and Disney's reputation depended on perfection. But his wife insisted he at least meet the girl. So Walt Disney flew to London and arranged a meeting at the swanky Dorchester Hotel with Hayley and her parents. What happened in that room would set the course for the next 6 years of Hayley's life. The moment Disney met Hayley, something clicked. There was an authenticity about her, a genuine quality that couldn't be manufactured or taught. She wasn't trying to be a movie star, she just was one. Disney signed her to a 5-year contract on the spot, though her parents were reluctant. They understood the Hollywood machine and its tendency to chew up and spit out young talent. They'd heard the horror stories of child stars whose lives imploded under the pressure. But the opportunity was simply too extraordinary to pass up. Hayley Mills was going to Disney, and the world would never be the same. Pollyanna premiered in 1960 and became an instant sensation. Hayley's portrayal of the eternally optimistic orphan girl touched hearts across America. Critics praised her natural acting ability, noting that she never seemed to be performing, just being. At age 14, she won the Academy Juvenile Award, receiving a miniature Oscar statuette that she would treasure for years until it was tragically stolen from her London home in the late 1980s. Success had arrived faster than anyone could have imagined, but with it came something Hayley hadn't anticipated: complete and total loss of control over her own life. The Disney contract was more than just a work agreement. It was a blueprint for how Hayley Mills would be presented to the world. Disney had built his empire on wholesome family entertainment, and Hayley was to be the living embodiment of that brand. She was America's sweetheart, the good girl, the role model for every young person in the country. And Walt Disney intended to protect that image at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing Hayley's artistic freedom or personal desires. She quickly learned that her life was no longer her own. Every role had to fit the Disney mold. Every public appearance had to maintain the illusion of perfection. She was trapped in a character she'd created, unable to grow or evolve as an actress or as a person. But the real tensions began on the sets of her films, where the carefully constructed Disney image collided with the messy reality of human relationships. And nowhere was this more apparent than during the filming of The Parent Trap in 1961. This was the movie that would make Hayley Mills a global superstar, where she played dual roles as twins Sharon and Susan, separated at birth and reunited at summer camp. The technical achievement of having one actress play both roles was groundbreaking for its time, requiring precise choreography, body doubles, and innovative camera techniques. It was an enormous undertaking, and the pressure on 15-year-old Hayley was immense. She had to embody two completely different personalities, often acting opposite herself through clever editing and the use of a body double named Susan Henning. The shoot was exhausting, demanding, and at times, absolutely miserable. Her co-stars in The Parent Trap were Maureen O'Hara and Brian Keith, playing her parents in the film. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Publicity shots showed them laughing together, the picture of a happy film family. Maureen O'Hara, the fiery Irish actress known for her roles in classic Hollywood films, publicly praised Hayley's talent and professionalism. Their on-screen mother-daughter relationship appeared to extend beyond the camera, with O'Hara taking Hayley under her wing and offering guidance. Hayley would later describe learning how to behave on a professional set by watching O'Hara work. The bond between them seemed genuine, almost maternal, and for years the public believed they shared a special friendship. But then there was Brian Keith. The ruggedly handsome actor was cast as the twins' father, and his easygoing charm made him seem like the perfect screen dad. Yet decades later, when Hayley Mills finally began speaking openly about her experiences, a very different picture emerged. The relationship between Hayley and Brian Keith was, at best, strained. At worst, it was filled with a tension that made filming scenes together uncomfortable and sometimes unbearable. Sources close to the production would later reveal that Keith had difficulty sharing the spotlight with a teenage girl. He was the established star, or so he thought, but The Parent Trap wasn't his movie. It was Hayley's. She was the focal point, the draw, the reason audiences filled theaters. And some reports suggest that Keith couldn't quite accept that reality. Hayley was the star, but she was also just 15 years old, navigating the complex dynamics of a major Hollywood production while trying to deliver not one but two performances. Keith, by contrast, was an experienced actor who expected deference and respect. When that didn't materialize in the way he anticipated, tensions simmered. Hayley would later admit in interviews that the experience of working with Keith was one of the most challenging of her early career. She described feeling dismissed, undervalued, and at times outright ignored by her co-star. For a young actress already dealing with the enormous pressure of carrying a film, this treatment was devastating. Years later, as Hayley reflected on her career in her memoir Forever Young and in various interviews, she would speak more candidly about these dynamics. She acknowledged that there were actors she worked with who made the experience joyful and collaborative, and others who made it feel like a daily battle. While she often chose her words carefully, careful not to destroy reputations or burn bridges, those close to her understood the subtext. Brian Keith represented everything that was wrong with Hollywood's old guard, the entitled male stars who couldn't handle being upstaged by talent, especially when that talent came in the form of a teenage girl. But if The Parent Trap tested Hayley's patience and professionalism, it was nothing compared to what would come next. In 1966, Hayley was cast in The Trouble with Angels, a comedy about mischievous students at a Catholic boarding school. Her co-star was Rosalind Russell, a legendary actress with a career spanning decades and an ego to match. Russell was cast as the Mother Superior, the stern but loving authority figure who contends with Hayley's character, a rebellious troublemaker named Mary Clancy. On paper, it should have been a match made in heaven, the veteran actress mentoring the young star in a charming, light-hearted film. In reality, it became one of the most hostile working relationships of Hayley's career. According to Russell herself, she and Hayley Mills did not get along during filming. Russell claimed publicly that every time she turned her back or walked away from Hayley, the young actress would stick her tongue out at her. Think about that for a moment. Rosalind Russell, one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, felt compelled to go on record stating that a 20-year-old Hayley Mills was mocking her behind her back. On the surface, it sounds almost childish, like a petty playground dispute. But dig deeper and you'll find something much more revealing about the power dynamics at play. The truth is more nuanced than Russell's version of events. Hayley was playing a character, Mary Clancy, who was supposed to be mischievous and rebellious. In one scene, she was caught sticking her tongue out at a passing Mother Superior, played by Russell in full habit. Hayley, staying in character and playing around to maintain the energy of the scene, continued the gesture even when they weren't actively filming. She had no idea that Russell was taking it personally, interpreting it as a direct insult rather than an actress committed to her role. When Russell confronted her about it later, Hayley was mortified. She'd been trying to stay in character, to maintain the playful rebelliousness that made Mary Clancy so entertaining. But Russell saw only disrespect. This incident reveals something crucial about Hayley's experience in Hollywood. She was constantly caught between expectations. Disney wanted her to be the perfect, well-behaved girl off-screen, yet many of her roles required her to play rebellious or mischievous characters on screen. When she tried to embody those characters fully, as any serious actor would, she was criticized for being disrespectful or difficult. The double standard was staggering. Male actors were praised for their commitment to character, for staying in role and bringing authenticity to their performances. But when Hayley did the same thing, she was reprimanded for being immature or unprofessional. The hypocrisy was not lost on her, and it bred a deep resentment that would fester for years. What made matters worse was that Hayley couldn't defend herself publicly. Remember, she was still under contract with Disney, and the studio had very specific ideas about how their stars should behave. Speaking out against a respected veteran actress like Rosalind Russell would have been career suicide. So Hayley stayed silent, absorbing the criticism and the negative press, maintaining that perfect Disney image even as it slowly suffocated her. She smiled for the cameras, gave gracious interviews, and pretended that everything was wonderful. Inside, she was screaming. The cumulative effect of these experiences, working with actors who resented her success, navigating the impossible expectations of the Disney brand, and losing control over her own career, began to take a serious toll. Hayley developed an eating disorder, struggling with bulimia as she tried to maintain the perfect image everyone expected. The pressure to look a certain way, to be eternally young and innocent, was crushing. She was growing up, her body changing, but the world wanted her to remain 12 years old forever. The disconnect between who she was and who she was expected to be became unbearable. And then there was the matter of money. Despite being one of the biggest stars at Disney, despite generating millions of dollars in box office revenue, Hayley Mills would eventually lose nearly all of her earnings. The details are complex, involving mismanagement, questionable financial decisions by those entrusted with her wealth, and a tax case that dragged on for years. By the time she reached adulthood and could take control of her own finances, much of what she'd earned was gone. The girl who had been worth millions found herself starting over, financially vulnerable despite years of backbreaking work. In 1965, Hayley's 5-year contract with Disney came to an end. It's unclear whether she chose not to renew or whether Disney decided not to extend the contract, but either way, Hayley Mills was finally free. She could pursue roles that challenged her, that allowed her to grow as an actress and as a person. But that freedom came with its own complications. She'd spent her formative years being told exactly who to be and what to do. Now, suddenly thrust into independence, she had to figure out who Hayley Mills really was beneath the carefully crafted Disney persona. One of her first acts of rebellion was accepting a role in The Family Way, a 1966 British film that dealt with mature themes, including a wedding night that doesn't go as planned. For the first time in her career, Hayley appeared in a scene that was decidedly UN Disney, shedding the wholesome image that had defined her entire adolescence. The film was directed by Roy Bolting, and during production, 20-year-old Hayley began a relationship with the 53-year-old director. The age gap, 33 years, was staggering. Bolting was more than twice her age and, at the time they met, still married to his third wife with children at home. The relationship sent shockwaves through Hollywood and British film circles. This was not the behavior expected of Disney's Golden Girl. Hayley knew the relationship would be controversial, but she was desperate to prove that she was an adult, that she could make her own decisions, even if those decisions were questionable. She was trying to reclaim her life, to assert autonomy over her choices in a way she'd never been allowed before. In hindsight, it's easy to see the relationship for what it likely was, a young woman rebelling against years of control, seeking validation from an older man who represented everything her Disney image was not. Hayley and Roy Bolting married in 1971, and almost immediately, Hayley knew it was a mistake. She would later write in her memoir that within weeks of the wedding, she realized the marriage was failing. The age difference, which had seemed romantic and daring when they were dating, became an insurmountable barrier in daily life. They were at completely different stages of their lives, with different priorities and expectations. Bolting, already established in his career and set in his ways, couldn't or wouldn't accommodate Hayley's need to grow and explore. She felt trapped once again, but this time the cage was of her own making. The marriage lasted until 1977, when Hayley finally found the courage to leave. She'd met actor Lee Lawson in 1975, and the connection between them was immediate. Lawson was closer to her age, someone who understood her world and respected her independence. Hayley ended her marriage to Bolting and moved in with Lawson, with whom she had a son named Jason. Though she and Lawson would eventually part ways in 1984, that relationship represented a turning point for Hayley. She was finally making choices for herself, not because Disney dictated them or because she was rebelling against her image, but because they felt right to her. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Hayley continued acting, though she never again reached the heights of fame she'd experienced as a child. She transitioned to theater, making her stage debut in a 1969 West End revival of Peter Pan. She took on more mature, complex roles that showcased her range as an actress. And slowly, painfully, she began to reclaim her narrative. She started speaking more openly about the pressures of child stardom, the loss of her fortune, her struggles with eating disorders, and the complicated relationships she'd navigated in Hollywood. In 1997, Hayley began a relationship with actor Feud, and this partnership would prove to be one of the most stable and fulfilling of her life. Bamji, respectful of her past and supportive of her continued work, gave Hayley the space to finally be herself without judgment or expectation. After decades of feeling defined by others, whether Disney executives, directors, or co-stars, she found someone who accepted her entirely. In 2021, at age 75, Hayley Mills published her memoir, Forever Young. The book was a revelation, a candid and often heartbreaking look at the realities of child stardom. She wrote about meeting Walt Disney, whom she described as demanding but ultimately protective. She wrote about the roles she was forced to turn down, including the title role in Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, which her parents vetoed because they feared it would taint her wholesome image. She wrote about her struggles with bulimia, her disastrous marriage to Roy Bolting, and the painful process of losing nearly all her money. And she wrote, with carefully chosen but unmistakable clarity, about the actors who made her life difficult. Hayley never explicitly named Brian Keith as someone she hated, but the subtext was clear to anyone reading closely. She described feeling overshadowed and dismissed by male co-stars who couldn't handle working with a young woman who was more talented and more popular than they were. She talked about the isolation of being the star but not being treated like one, of carrying films on her shoulders while being told to stay quiet and grateful. The portrait she painted was of a young girl thrust into an adult world, surrounded by people who either wanted to control her or resented her success. The revelation about Rosalind Russell was more explicit. Hayley explained the tongue-sticking incident, providing context that Russell had never acknowledged. She expressed frustration at being misunderstood, at having her dedication to her craft interpreted as childish disrespect. And she made it clear that the experience of working with Russell, far from being the collaborative mentorship everyone assumed, was actually one of the lonelier periods of her career. But perhaps the most powerful revelations in Forever Young concerned Walt Disney himself and the contract that defined her adolescence. Hayley expressed gratitude for the opportunities Disney gave her, acknowledging that he launched her career and made her a star. But she also spoke honestly about the cost of that fame. Disney's need to protect the brand meant that Hayley couldn't grow up on her own terms. She was forever young, as the memoir's title ironically suggests, frozen in time as the perfect innocent girl even as she aged and evolved. Disney controlled which roles she could take, which public appearances she could make, even how she should dress and speak in interviews. It was suffocating, and while Hayley understood that Disney's intentions were protective, the effect was nevertheless controlling. Reading between the lines of the memoir and listening to Hayley's interviews over the years, a pattern emerges. The person Hayley Mills truly hated more than anyone wasn't a single individual. It was a system that treated her like a commodity rather than a person. It was the parade of insecure actors who diminished her contributions. It was the studio executives who saw dollar signs instead of a young girl struggling under impossible pressure. It was a society that demanded she remain perfect and innocent while simultaneously criticizing her for being too good to be true. And yes, it was specific people like Brian Keith and Rosalind Russell who embodied that system's cruelty in personal, tangible ways. But if we're looking for the one person Hayley Mills truly hated, the one individual who had the most profound and lasting impact on her life, we have to consider someone else entirely. Someone who was there from the very beginning, who signed that 5-year contract and set the wheels in motion. Someone who genuinely cared for Hayley but whose vision for her career superseded her own desires and needs. That person was Walt Disney. Now, before the pitchforks come out, let me be clear. Hayley Mills has never said she hated Walt Disney. In fact, she's often spoken warmly of him, describing him as a good boss who was protective and genuinely interested in her well-being. She understood that Disney saw something special in her and gave her opportunities that most actors only dream of. But intentions don't erase impact. Disney's control over her career, his insistence on maintaining her image at all costs, and the contract that bound her to his vision were the root cause of so much of Hayley's suffering. Think about it. Every difficult relationship Hayley had with co-stars stemmed from the roles Disney cast her in and the image he cultivated. Brian Keith's resentment wasn't just about Hayley's talent, it was about the fact that she was the star of a Disney film, given preferential treatment and top billing because the studio had invested heavily in building her brand. Rosalind Russell's frustration wasn't just about a tongue being stuck out, it was about a young actress who had achieved more fame and success by age 20 than many actors achieved in a lifetime, all thanks to the Disney machine. The pressure that led to Hayley's eating disorder came directly from the need to maintain the Disney image, to stay forever young and perfect. The financial losses she suffered were in part due to the complex arrangements that came with being a child star under contract, where others made decisions about her money before she was old enough to understand. Even her disastrous relationship with Roy Bolting can be traced back to Disney. She was rebelling against the wholesome image, trying to prove she was an adult by making the most adult decision she could think of, which unfortunately involved a man 3 decades her senior. Walt Disney gave Hayley Mills everything, and in doing so, he took everything from her. He gave her fame but took her childhood. He gave her opportunities but took her autonomy. He gave her an image but took her identity. And the cruel irony is that Disney probably never saw it that way. He genuinely believed he was helping her, protecting her, giving her the best possible start in an industry known for chewing people up and spitting them out. In his mind, the contract was a safety net, not a trap. The image was armor, not a prison. He couldn't see that in saving Hayley Mills the child actress, he was destroying Hayley Mills the person. By the time Hayley's contract ended and she was free to make her own choices, the damage was done. She'd spent her most formative years, from 12 to 17, being told who she was and who she had to be. The psychological impact of that kind of control doesn't just disappear when a contract expires. It takes years, sometimes decades, to undo. Hayley spent much of her adult life trying to figure out who she really was beneath the layers of expectation and image. And in many ways, she's still working on that process, even now at 79 years old. In recent years, as Hayley has become more willing to speak candidly about her experiences, the full picture of her Hollywood journey has come into focus. She's talked about the 5 actors she had the most difficulty with, though she's been careful not to name all of them publicly. Brian Keith and Rosalind Russell are the most obvious candidates based on her accounts, but there were others. Actors who saw her as competition rather than a colleague. Directors who were impatient with her because she was young. Producers who valued her marketability more than her well-being. But Hayley has also been clear about something else. She doesn't want pity. She doesn't want people to think of her as a victim. Yes, she went through difficult experiences. Yes, she was controlled and exploited in ways that would be unacceptable today. But she also had an extraordinary career that brought joy to millions. She created iconic characters that still resonate today. She survived an industry that has destroyed countless others. And she emerged on the other side with her integrity intact, something many child stars cannot say. The story of Hayley Mills is not a simple tale of good versus evil, of an innocent victim and a villainous oppressor. It's a complex, nuanced story about the cost of fame, the burden of expectation, and the struggle to maintain one's identity in an industry designed to create and sell personas. It's about a little girl who became the world's sweetheart and spent decades trying to figure out who she was when the cameras stopped rolling. It's about the actors who made that journey harder and the one man, Walt Disney, who set her on that path in the first place. Today, Hayley Mills is 79 years old. She continues to act occasionally, taking roles that interest her rather than ones that will boost her fame. She's content with her life and her choices, even the mistakes. She's made peace with her past, though that doesn't mean she's forgotten the pain. In interviews, she speaks with a wisdom earned through hard experience, offering advice to young actors about the pitfalls of fame and the importance of maintaining one's sense of self. When asked about the difficult relationship she had in Hollywood, Hayley often deflects or changes the subject. She's reached a point in her life where rehashing old wounds serves no purpose. But occasionally, when pressed, she'll acknowledge the truth. There were people who made her life difficult. There were people who took advantage of her youth and vulnerability. There were people who valued what she could do for them more than who she was as a person. And yes, there was one person who had more influence over her life than anyone else, whose decisions shaped her destiny in ways both wonderful and terrible. That person was Walt Disney. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He didn't set out to harm Hayley Mills. But his vision for her career, his insistence on controlling her image, and the contract that bound her to his will had consequences that reverberated through her entire life. In trying to protect her, he imprisoned her. In trying to make her a star, he stole her childhood. And in creating the perfect Disney image, he made it nearly impossible for Hayley to ever truly be herself. So when we ask who Hayley Mills truly hated more than anyone, the answer is complicated. It's Brian Keith for his ego and insecurity. It's Rosalind Russell for her inability to see past her own pride. It's the countless others who made her feel small and unvalued. But most of all, it's the system that Walt Disney created, a system that valued image over humanity, profit over person, and perfection over authenticity. Disney gave Hayley Mills the world, and in exchange, he asked for her soul. The final twist in this story, the surprise ending that makes everything even more tragic, is this. Despite everything, despite the control and the pressure and the loss of her childhood, Hayley Mills doesn't actually hate Walt Disney. She's grateful for what he gave her, even as she acknowledges what it cost. She understands that he was a product of his time, operating in an industry that treated child actors as investments rather than human beings. She recognizes that without Disney, she might never have become a star, might never have had the career that, for all its difficulties, also brought immense joy and fulfillment. That's the real tragedy of Hayley Mills's story. She can't even hate the person most responsible for her pain because that person also gave her everything she ever wanted. It's a paradox that defines her entire experience in Hollywood, the blessing and the curse intertwined so completely that you can't separate one from the other. Walt Disney made Hayley Mills a star, and in doing so, he made her a prisoner of that stardom. And Hayley, even now, even after everything, can't bring herself to fully resent him for it. So who did Hayley Mills truly hate more than anyone? Maybe the most accurate answer is herself. For signing that contract. For not speaking up sooner. For allowing others to control her life for so long. For losing her childhood in pursuit of fame. For making mistakes in relationships because she was trying to reclaim autonomy she never should have lost in the first place. The person Hayley Mills struggled with most wasn't Brian Keith or Rosalind Russell or even Walt Disney. It was the version of herself that the world created, that perfect Disney girl who never truly existed but whose shadow she could never escape. That's the real story. That's the truth Hayley Mills lived for decades before she finally found the courage to speak it. She was trapped not by any single person but by the mythology built around her, a mythology so powerful that even she began to believe it. Breaking free from that took a lifetime, and the journey is still ongoing. At 79, Hayley Mills is still discovering who she is beyond the roles she played and the image she portrayed. And perhaps that's the most hopeful part of this story. It's never too late to reclaim your narrative. It's never too late to become yourself. Even after a lifetime of being forever young, Hayley Mills is finally growing into the person she was always meant to be. And that person, the real Hayley Mills beneath all the Disney magic and Hollywood glamour, is someone worth celebrating. Someone who survived. Someone who persevered. Someone who, despite everything, never lost her capacity for joy and grace. That is her legacy. Not just the film she made or the award she won, but the strength it took to emerge from the machine of child stardom with her spirit intact. And that, more than any role she ever played, is her greatest performance.